Hello, New York Giants fans, and welcome to a new edition of the Valentine's Views podcast here on YouTube. Please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. We are 3 weeks away from the NFL draft. We've been talking about it for months and months, and we'll talk about it for 3 more weeks and probably a month or two after that. And one of the big things about the upcoming draft is from a Giants perspective is what are the Cleveland Browns going to do, and how is that going to impact the Giants draft? And here to help me figure all of that out is Jared Mueller of SB Nation's Cleveland Browns site, Dawgs by Nature. Jared, thank you so much for hopping on.
Absolutely, Ed. It's good to see you, brother. It's only been like a month since Indianapolis or something like that, but it
Yep.
it feels like a year ago.
Yeah, I know it. Did we actually go to Indy?
I remember really big pretzel or pizza sticks and not a whole lot else.
Yeah, we did do that, didn't we?
We
Jared and I
did.
have gotten to know each other a little bit at Indy the last couple of years, and I've covered the combine, I think 7 years in a row. But you you have me by a mile in that department. How many years in a row have you done Indy now?
13.
No, no, no. I started way too late.
Yeah,
Started way too late. I'm
it's a
never gonna
it's a
catch you.
young man's game, that's for darn sure. I'm starting to run out of energy, and those naps aren't long enough in the middle of the day, and those wake
they,
up calls are way too early.
they never are. You know, one of the secret sauce in Indianapolis is being able to do the bar scene until 3 or 4 in the morning, and that's a secret sauce that I ran out of a long time ago.
It is. It's my 1 week of almost kind of bachelorishness
Yes.
without too much of the debauchery. But
Hmm.
listen, that's when conversations happen. That's when connections happen. And at this point, I just text people and be like, "Hey, I'm sitting next to you right now. Oh, hey, I didn't see you there."
Yeah, that in some of those places with so many people around, in some of those places, that's the only way to get somebody to know that you're there.
Yep. Or you
Even if you're
tackle them,
five,
one or the
even
other.
if you're 5 feet away. Hey, turn to your left. I'm
Right
over
around
here.
the corner.
Turn left. Anyway, so Jared, my friend, let's talk about the upcoming draft, the Cleveland Browns, the New York Giants, and you and I were in Indy together trying to figure all of this stuff out, and you hear a different story every day.
Yep.
You hear a different story. I mean, one day it's the Browns are going to draft Abdul Carter and the Giants are going to draft Shedeur Sanders, and the next day it's both of them are going to pass on quarterbacks, and the next day it's Shedeur's going at number 2. The latest thing that we heard, the latest thing that we heard from an insider, Adam Schefter, said the other day on the McAfee show, I think it was, that it feels to him like, and that could mean anything. That could mean anything. That could mean he listened to Brian Daboll's media conference on Tuesday at the owners meeting, and came away with this idea. But he said it feels to him like both the Browns and the Giants are going to pass on Shedeur. And since Shedeur is the big topic, in this draft, where do you stand, and what's the buzz really, around the Browns, as far as Shedeur Sanders?
I think it's been a really interesting process. I think Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward are close to each other. They are definitely 1-2. It's Cam Ward, it's Shedeur Sanders in that order. But I feel like they've been pushed up the whole entire draft process from 10, 12, 15th kind of prospect. Now somehow Cam Ward is the third or fourth best prospect, sixth best prospect, and Shedeur Sanders is the 20th or 30th or some kind of crazy kind of number. Currently, from what we understand, the Browns do not plan on selecting Shedeur Sanders number two. They love his accuracy. They love his ability to process information. They do have some concerns about his pocket presence. His size is a little bit of a concern. I mean, we stood. I don't know if you did, but I stood next to him at the combine, and I felt large. And I am not a large human being. 5'11", 220 over here. I am not a large human being. Shedeur Sanders.
I don't have the Dan Patrick bell to ring when you give me the size and weight. I don't have. I gotta get one.
There you
You
go.
caught me off guard.
But Shedeur made me feel like a pretty big human being. And so there's some concerns there as well. But it's one of those things where I feel like the draft, we get so focused on upside, right? We get so focused on what they could do, what they might be able to do, that we miss out on what they are going to do and what they're able to do. And so I do think at this point in time, and I told you this at the combine, that the Giants do not love Shedeur Sanders. They like him just like the Browns do. And so at that part of the draft, at number two and number three, picking a player you really like just because they're a quarterback doesn't make a lot of sense, which then leads to the question, who does actually select Shedeur Sanders now that the Raiders have extended Geno Smith? Justin Fields is with the Jets on a 2-year contract. It creates a lot of kind of intrigue on what could be next. But I think for you and I, number two and number three are just too rich for Shedeur Sanders.
It's so interesting because it's draft guide season 2, and the Matt Waldman's draft guide and the Pro Football Focus draft guide are starting to roll in, and pretty soon we'll have the Beast from Dane Brugler, and we'll have Emery Hunt's draft guide to look at. And the reality of it is, as you look at Shedeur and as you read about Shedeur, nobody thinks Shedeur Sanders is a bad player.
Nope.
Nobody thinks Shedeur Sanders can't be a quarterback in the NFL. But there are a lot of people who think he's Derek Carr or Andy Dalton,
Mhm.
or that he's a starter who's just not going to elevate you, because
Right.
who's going to have to be elevated by what's around him. And 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 I think I told you at the combine that I was told that the Giants like Cam Ward and they like Shedeur Sanders, but that they didn't have at that time, and these things can change once you
Sure.
start to get around these players, and the Giants will get around Shedeur Sanders a lot over the next week or two. But at that point in time, I had been told that the Giants did not have grades on either of those quarterbacks that made them worthy of being selected at number 3 overall. So I throw my hands up when it comes to Shedeur, because that's viable and that's real, the
Mhm.
grades that they had at that point in time. But what's also real to me, and I've been around Brian Daboll a little bit, and I'm just going to throw this out. Brian Daboll is a passionate guy. He's an emotional guy. Brian Daboll signed off on drafting Kayvon Thibodeau, who's an edgy guy with a bit of a personality that takes some getting used to. He loved Malik Neighbors, who's another edgy guy who has a personality that takes some getting used to, and a potential, if things don't go well in New York, for that whole thing to blow up.
Totally
And
different, but Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston are personalities, not
yes,
edgy, but definitely
and
personalities.
and when it comes to Shedeur Sanders, and I'm just going to throw this out, for an outside perspective, what I have said, we saw the videos from the East-West Shrine game with Daboll and Sanders and all that. What I have said is, it wouldn't shock me if 3 weeks from now, Brian Daboll bangs the table for Shedeur Sanders and says, I love this kid. I love the personality. Give him to me.
Mhm.
It just wouldn't surprise me, because I think Daboll has an affinity for these guys that have some edge to them.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think the hard thing for Dayball and Joe Shane, different than honestly, I mean, we've heard from Jimmy Haslam this week in the Browns. While both teams were very bad last year, Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry are not on the hot seat.
Right.
This is year one of a 5-year extension. Literally
Hmm.
just started, right? So
Right.
whereas Dayball and Shane are, and so drafting Shedeur Sanders while having Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston, is that really going to save either one of their jobs? And can Shane really do that? Right?
Right.
I think it's a really interesting place to
The,
be for the Giants. I did a little thing for Browns fans. I asked them right now because of contract things. Would you rather trade for Micah Parsons or Brock Purdy? Obviously, we're talking draft right now, and contracts would be different. But the reality is Micah Parsons is a very simple comparison to Abdul Carter, and I think Shedeur Sanders is a pretty simple comparison to Brock Purdy. And the reality is, most people would say trade for Brock Purdy because you need the quarterback, right? But like Shedeur Sanders, Brock Purdy needs some talent around him. I think they're going to struggle when they are paying him $55 million, and have already gotten rid of Debo Samuel. Looks like they're keeping Brandon Ayuk, but they've lost a lot of talent around Brock Purdy. But that really, I think you brought up a great point with Shedeur, is he might have that edge, but do they need more so that he can be successful? And does Dayball and Shane have a chance to
right.
actually see that out?
And that is why I have said that, even, as you indicated, you think right now that all indications are that the Browns are not going to take a quarterback because they're just not in a situation where they're pressed. They can go get Derek Carr, or they can go get Kirk Cousins eventually, and they can get by for a year as they get out from under Deshaun Watson's money. And as you said, it's the very beginning of their
Mhm.
contract. For Dayball and Shane, they have no choice but to put a good product on the field, or to go all in as much as they can to put a good product on the field. And what I've said is, look, you can draft Shedeur and maybe he's your starting quarterback in 2026. Maybe he's your starting quarterback by week 15. But if he's your starting quarterback in week 15, the season's over and you're getting fired anyway. And Shedeur Sanders doesn't help you be a better football team in 2025 if you're the New York Giants and you've already got Russell Wilson, and that's the issue for me.
Well, and you also add on top of that, if you're the owner, if we draft Shedeur Sanders 3 and we fire Dayball and Shane, we are now most likely hiring a GM and a coach who want Shedeur Sanders as their quarterback, right? You don't
Right.
even have that kind of flexibility in 2026 to go after the best coach and the best GM, because you have to go after ones that want to run a system that Shedeur Sanders runs, which is not
Or
going
to
to
make it
be.
or to make it worse, you're hiring a coach and a GM who are being handed a quarterback that they don't want.
Yep. We saw that with Justin Fields in Chicago. We've seen it obviously time and time again. And I think the reality is, even as we've talked, Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter, all of that, the Giants are the one team that really could say, screw it, we're going to play Travis Hunter on both sides of the ball because we need to win. We don't care if we're going to wear him out. We don't care if we're going to possibly get him injured down the road. They're the one team that could risk their number 3 pick being playing on both sides of the ball far more often than maybe another team, because they need to win. Because again, like I think you wrote probably a number of articles on 2025. I think that's what all Dayball and Shane talked about at the combine, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that's really what it's about. So Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter. I mean, if we need to use Abdul Carter as a fullback to make the 2025 season better, you probably will be looking to do that as well. And so it's just such an interesting place for you guys at this point in time, and trying to figure out what's best for the team.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's do this. So let's move on from Shedeur a little bit, and let's talk about the number 2 pick, the number 3 pick. Let's talk about the choice
Mhm.
between Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter. And what I've said is, if both guys are sitting there for the Giants, which is probably not going to be the case, there isn't a wrong answer, really. There isn't a
Mm-mm.
wrong answer. I think you lean toward, I would lean toward, for the Giants, I would lean toward Travis Hunter for the simple reason that I look at free agency as a sort of tell for what
Mm.
teams might be thinking in the draft. And the Giants in free agency spent big money on a cornerback. They spent big money on a safety. They spent big money on an edge slash defensive end in Chauncey Golston. The only money they spent on offense in free agency was to bring back guys that they already had from the 31st ranked offense in the league, and to bring in two quarterbacks that they basically spent $14 million on, which is
Right.
nothing in terms of quarterback money. So it wouldn't shock me, so in a way, Travis Hunter, because he could play both sides, he could help them on both sides of the ball, even if it's part-time on both sides of the ball, you
Right.
know, 25 snaps on each side of the ball, something like that. But Travis Hunter, I think I would probably lean toward. But let's talk about the Browns and their decision. What we keep hearing is Abdul Carter for the Browns. Does that make sense to you? Is that where you think they're going? And why, if that's the case, why is Carter a better choice for the Browns than Travis Hunter?
I do think Carter is on the table. I think at this point in time there are really three options. It's Carter, it's Hunter, and it's a trade down. Again, we're assuming Cam Ward is the number one overall pick. I think that's really the three options for them. Carter would make sense if the Browns were looking at, we want a dominant defense. We want whoever is going to be the future quarterback to not have the pressure on them to carry the team. We want to be able to run the football. We want to be able to play controlled offense, and we want the defense to handle business on the other side. Carter makes a ton of sense for that reason. Myles Garrett, the best defensive end across from him has been Zadarius Smith, who was a little old and really has never been a great sack artist. He puts a lot of pressure on the quarterback, pushes the pocket, those kind of things. But he's never really, Myles Garrett has never really had a bend the edge kind of player on the other side. Jadeveon Clowney, same thing, really a push the pocket, big defensive end, but not someone who's going to bend the edge and cause havoc. And so having two of those style of players is a way for you to have an identity on defense. You are going to rush the passer. You are going to cause havoc for that offense, which could lead to the opposing offenses to run the ball more often, which again brings the score down, allows a young quarterback in 2026, 2027 to come along to develop a little bit like Lamar Jackson, a little bit like Josh Allen. So Abdul Carter does make sense for the Browns. It is not who I expect them to select, but at this point in time, we might be talking 60-40, 55-45. Um, a, a communication I received was one word and took me a second to break it down. But one concern with Abdul Carter isn't specifically injuries, but what is going on with Abdul Carter? What's going on with the shoulder? What's going on with the foot? And the word that was texted to me is the word DEXA, as in a DEXA scan. And so that doesn't mean it was a bad DEXA scan or he's even had a DEXA scan that the Browns have access to, but that bone density and some of those things are really important. They're the kind of next level of injury understanding that teams are going with. And so I think it would be important if, and I can be honest, I have no idea if medically they are allowed to get that or do get that at this point in time. I should probably look that up after getting that message. But that was the message I got from someone that I trust who just said DEXA. And so if Carter's DEXA scan or any other medical comes up concerning, all of a sudden you have another reason to pass and to move in a different direction. The other thing for both the Browns and the Giants is asset allocation. You guys traded for Brian Burns, signed him to a large contract. Uh, Thibodeau, as you said, was an early draft pick. Obviously, he's coming up on a contract, but you guys have already dedicated a lot of resources to that position. The Browns obviously signed Myles Garrett to a ridiculously large contract, deserved contract that has already been surpassed, but they've put a lot of assets already there. And so, in a couple of years, when Abdul Carter is ready for his second contract, Myles Garrett will still be on his rather large deal. And so, there is some question about how do you allocate even more assets to that one position that you're already paying $40 million a year to. And then for you guys, obviously Burns and Thibodeau, some assets have already been allocated there as well.
Yeah, it makes it an interesting debate. I keep going back to Steve Spagnuolo won a Super Bowl as the Giants defensive coordinator, trying to figure out how to play Michael Strahan, Justin Tuck, OCU Manura, and Matthias Kiwanuka at the same time and managed to figure it out.
That's a lot of fun right there.
That's a lot of fun, but not everybody's going to be able to do it. And financially, it doesn't always work in this modern NFL. Um, you said something interesting. You said as much as the mock drafts are leaning that way, and the analysts keep banging the Carter train for the Browns, you said you don't expect them to go that way. Do you expect them to go to Travis Hunter? Do you expect them to move that pick?
I think they're open to moving it. The Browns love the mystery. I've been told the Browns are the most paranoid organization in the NFL. And that has been true since I started covering this team 15 years ago. So they love the mystery. They love how everybody's kind of spinning on their heads, trying to figure out what they're going to do. With that said, the Browns offense was terrible. They have talented players, Jerry Judy, David Njoku. They liked what they saw as Cedric Tillman until a concussion knocked him out at the end of the year for a few games. But they lack talent on the offensive side of the ball. I've been told Nick Chubb will be returning. There is nothing signed yet. I don't have a timeline on that yet, but I've been told Nick Chubb will be returning. But when you have either Kirk Cousins, Kenny Pickett, Jalen Milrow, a Jackson Dart, whoever it might be, as your quarterback, you really do need to build around them. And Travis Hunter is an explosive, unique athlete. He has impressive change of direction skill. You can put Travis Hunter almost anywhere, and he will be able to outrun, outmaneuver any cornerback in front of him. And so the Browns will primarily see him as a wide receiver who can play cornerback. I would also not be shocked that if at some point in time Hunter is the Browns returner when they need a big return. He just has that unique skill. And he also just is great with the ball in his hands. He's going to catch pretty much everything. And he is Odell Beckham Jr. like, and we share that connection. You got a good version of him, not so much over here, with the ball in his hands. Beckham, it wasn't an impressive physical stature, but he made plays. And that's what I see out of Travis Hunter. And I think that's the style, maybe a little bit bigger, maybe a little faster, maybe a little bit more. Doesn't mean he'll be as good as OBJ was when he was healthy. But I think the Browns see that out of him. And when they look at their very terrible offense, they see the ability to be really creative with Hunter, Judy, and Joku, at least Chubb for a year, Cedric Tillman. All of a sudden, that's an offense that can make a Kirk Cousins, a Derek Carr down the road, even a Jalen Milrow, if you think of Lamar and Josh Allen early in their careers. That's all of a sudden an offense that can do some things. Whereas just adding another talented defender doesn't change the direction and the trajectory of the team.
Let me ask you this about Travis Hunter, because I tend to think that with Brian Daboll as head coach, if he fell to the Giants, I heard a couple of months ago that the Giants looked at Travis Hunter as cornerback first.
Mhm.
And I don't necessarily buy that, especially after signing Paulson Adebo. And you have Tay Banks on the roster still, and Tay Banks up and down, but he's still a first round pick on a rookie contract. Drew Phillips in the slot was tremendous last year. So you've got three guys. Um, but I look at Travis Hunter and I think Brian Daboll's going to want to try to put the ball in his hands if he gets him.
Mhm.
But I'm just going to ask you. I look at Hunter as a weapon, but I watch Travis Hunter and I don't watch great pass routes. I don't,
right?
there are a lot of times when I see him just sort of meander his way down the field, and all of a sudden he finds himself in a spot where Shedeur's running for his life, and he throws Hunter the ball, and and Hunter makes a play. I
Mhm.
don't see him as a great route running technical wide receiver, but you just put him out there, and whether it's schemed catches or whatever, you just put him out there and you find a way to throw the ball at him, and and good things happen. He doesn't have to be a great, route running, technical, precise wide receiver, because that's not what he is.
He's not at this point in time, but y'all, I mean, two things. Obviously, playing both sides of the ball affects that. The other thing is Pat Shermer is not a very good offensive coordinator. He's not a very good coach, not just from his time at the Browns. You can watch some of their offensive schemes, and you're like, why are three players always in the same place and look like one of them is the primary receiver on that route, right? And so there's been a lot of conversation that Shedeur Sanders literally ran the offense, put in the plays, designed the plays, coached the plays, ran the offensive, all of that. And so if you don't have an offensive coordinator who is detail oriented, I'm not sure your wide receivers coach is talking to you like Brian Hartline is talking to all of the Ohio State wide receivers about your release points and what you're trying to do and getting on a hip and stacking a corner and all that. So
Mhm.
yeah, but he has to work on that, right? That has to get better. But it is really fun to watch him, especially against zone defenses. He has a feel, right? You can just be like, wow, he just kind of could tell that that corner was going to drift. And he fell in as that corner started drifting. He fell into that zone to become available to Shedeur. He's one of those really friendly, quarterback friendly receivers. But you're right. If he does, he really does need to work on the nuances of his game. And that's why I'm not sure in year one, you want him as a wide receiver, if you're going to have him play cornerback much at all before the whatever your bye week is or middle
Mhm.
of the season, late in the season.
It's an interesting problem to have.
It's a great
Let's
problem to
let
have.
let's put it that way. It's a very interesting problem to have. Jared, let's spin forward again here, and let's talk about round two. Browns have the 33rd pick. Giants have the 34th pick. And and I'll be honest, I've done two mock drafts now. And the SB Nation Writers mock draft, where, you passed, you took, who did you take?
Took Hunter.
You took Hunter and I took Carter. That's right.
Yep.
And in both of those mock drafts, you know, so we both passed on quarterback. So my question is now, you know, which one of us is going to get the quarterback we want on day two? Or, a more direct question for you would be, do you expect the Browns, even, we're talking, Kenny Pickett and Kirk Cousins and maybe Derek Carr, and we're talking all of those guys. Do you expect the Browns to make a play for a quarterback, on day two, maybe with that 33rd pick, as a guy that at least gives them a long-term option?
I do, but I don't expect them to force it. And so I think it'll be a really interesting place. Against everything that I've seen on film, I've heard that they do really like Jackson Dart. They obviously have all the inside information about Jalen Milrow because Tommy Reese was his offensive coordinator at Alabama for a year. So they have a lot of inside information there. Tyler Shuck is an older prospect. I always get concerned about them that you finally can be good or dominate when you're 25 and have been playing in college for 5, 6 years. So there's a lot of concern there. Given everything, it would make the most sense for them to draft Jalen Milrow at 33, or if they thought he would fall to the third round, fine, don't risk it. But maybe you make a trade up because we have three or two third round picks. But Jalen Milrow has a ton of upside, an athlete, doesn't have to play right away. Pickett, Cousins, probably Again, everything I've been told, Cousins and Pickett will be the Browns quarterbacks this year, unless Shedeur Sanders falls and the Browns trade up to 23 with the Minnesota Vikings, who only have 4 draft picks. Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah is came from Cleveland, good friends with Andrew Berry. They have a relationship. Unless Shedeur falls and they trade up, Kirk Cousins will be the quarterback. So if we assume Shedeur is drafted by the Saints, the Jets, whoever, in that bottom of the top 10 area,
Yeah,
I
I don't expect him to fall. I don't care what people say. I do not expect Shedeur Sanders to get past the Saints. I just don't.
Yeah, that does it. I agree with you. It doesn't make sense. They need to build forward, and you can't do that the way they're doing things. They need a cheap rookie. So yeah, Shador there makes sense. So from everything I'm hearing, yes, they would like to draft Jackson Dart. From everything I would do, that would be Jalen Milrow. Even if I thought I could trade down a little bit, but I do like that 5th year option with moving back into the first round. But again, I don't know if the Browns, kind of what we talked about with kind of where they're at on not on the hot seat. I don't know if they're going to be as aggressive as maybe some people think about drafting a quarterback, because if they're going to overdraft them, might as well just go ahead and add another defensive tackle, add an offensive tackle, add Harold Fannin from Bowling Green, a local product who a lot of people are really high on, could be that second tight end, or there will be some defensive ends there. So I think they have their eye on kind of those 3 quarterbacks in that range, but are not going to go out of their way just so that they have drafted a quarterback in the first 2 rounds.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Let's talk about Milrow for a minute because I get asked about Milrow and the Giants quite a bit. Um, and the reality of it is, before they signed Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston, who I'll also ask you about before
Yeah.
we call it a day, um, I thought with Brian Daboll on the hot seat in 2025 and Joe Shane maybe on the hot seat as well, I thought Milrow was a guy that the Giants just couldn't touch. But now they're in a situation where they maybe don't need that rookie quarterback to play in 2025. If that rookie quarterback does play, it's in an end of the season. What difference does it make kind of situation? Um, so maybe you could do it. But then again, do you draft a guy like Jalen Milrow, who is a long term project? And let me put it to you this way. Do you see the Browns with Kevin Stefanski, and as you said, sort of at the beginning with Stefanski and Andrew Berry, is that a better location for a guy like Milrow, who's a long-term project, than a place like the Giants where there might be turnover, in the coaching staff and the front office in a year?
I do. I think I think the Browns would put him in a better position. I think what's interesting though is for you guys, for the Giants, for Dayball and Shane, Milrow might be, now that you have Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston, Milrow might be a really interesting option only because he can give you a little bit of now and later, in that he can make an impact as that kind of wildcat package who can still, he can throw the ball. He's got a good deep arm. He could create some plays for the team now, in that sub package kind of thing, goal line, whatever that looks like, and then make Mara think, wow, we might have something for the future. These guys have it, and we know Dayball was a part of Josh Allen's development, so he could pull from some of what he did with Josh Allen early in his career. We talk about MVP Josh Allen. Josh Allen couldn't hit the broadside of a barn when he came out. He could throw it really hard and through the barn, but his accuracy, him and Jalen Milrow were very similar in that way. So I think the Browns would be a better fit, but he actually might be, now that you have your 2 veterans in place, he might be someone that Dayball and Shane think, you know what, we can actually do something here for now and later to maybe save our jobs in 2 different ways.
That's an interesting theory because Dayball did say the other day, he was talking about Russell Wilson, and he said, he said before the Giants signed Russell Wilson, he went back and he watched every snap of Russell Wilson's 13-year NFL career, which I
Holy
cannot
cow.
imagine how much time that took. All right,
That's
I
got to
can't
be on like
imagine.
1.5, right? Like
Yeah,
2.2 times speed.
maybe I don't know. I just wanted to know. Dave Gettleman's famous line was, "I watched film until my eyes bled." I wanted to ask, if I'd have been there, I would ask Dable if his eyes were bleeding when he was
Yeah.
done. But that's an interesting theory because one of the things that Dable did say that was clear with Russell Wilson is that he doesn't have the explosive ability with his legs that he used to have. So you
Mm-mm.
could perhaps have a package for Milrow, that involves the RPO game and and designed quarterback run with the pass option and all that. And Milrow does fit Dable's, I want to throw the ball down the field sort of personality.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting choice. I wonder what the Giants would do. I feel like the safer route, because of his age and because of his experience and because of the things he already does well, I think the safer route is Jackson Dart.
Mhm.
But we shall see what choices both of our teams have. And as Dayball said the other day, you just never know. You never know what teams what teams you don't expect to make a quarterback move make a quarterback move. So you just never know, how these things are going to work out. But
It's a fun draft, that's for sure. It's not top heavy, but man, it's a really interesting, fun draft.
it sure is. And if you could find a way to stockpile some extra picks on the second day of the draft, even into round 4, you know, in somewhere in rounds 2 to 4, you can do really well in this draft.
I mean, I think you guys really want Travis Hunter and want to give the Browns like a third round pick, right?
No, no. I don't think you and I are going to be doing business here. We
I
may
don't think
be
so either.
we may be doing business with some other similar allies, trying to jockey for position.
Yeah, I could see
But
there being some competition, that's for sure.
but it's very interesting, and we'll see how that all works out. But before I let you go, you and I have communicated back and forth, somewhat kiddingly, after the Giants signed Jameis Winston. And I was in favor of the Giants signing Winston for a lot of reasons. Um, Not that I wanted to make him a 17 game starter, but I was okay with them adding him to the room.
Right.
Um, just just talk to me about the Jameis Winston experience.
And that's the right way to say it, right? Like, I'll just be honest, he annoyed the living daylights out of a lot of people in the Browns organization. If you get a chance to interview him, he will not answer your question, but he will say a lot of words.
And he
Um,
will entertain and smile and make you laugh while he's saying them.
he absolutely will, and he's a hard worker. He's authentic, like it's not fake. Um, the Browns were open to trading him at the NFL trade deadline when he had started games, when he had, and I'm going to be off on schedule, either beaten the Ravens or the Steelers or both. I can't remember now, just looking back at it. And the Browns were still interested in possibly trading him because interceptions and throwing the ball and just firing it out there and seeing what happens just is guessing is not really a Kevin Stefanski thing. And so you can do that in a lot of offenses with a lot of, depending on your talent, you have that big guy to throw it to. Um, Jameis is often guessing what's going on the other side, and sometimes that works out really really well, and sometimes it does not. And it's
Yeah.
why it's one of the reasons they do like Shedeur Sanders. Joe
Mm-hmm.
Flacco threw the Browns out of the playoff game against the Houston Texans. Jameis Winston threw the Browns out of a number of games this season and still acted like everything was okay, everything was going to be great, which is great as a mental health professional sitting over here. It's great to have that kind of mindset. His teammates were not always pleased with having to hear him in their ear or on a microphone say some things, but they like him as a person. not always love him as a teammate. He is going to throw interceptions. He is a
Yeah,
great guy, but that is the experience with Jameis
it's
Winston.
it's interesting because what I have said is that he's Drew Lock on steroids. The highs are, because Lock is that sort of roller coaster ride, but he's sort of like the kiddie roller coaster.
Yep.
Jameis Winston is kind of like, just go look up whatever the top 10 roller coasters are in the world. And
They're
Jameis
mostly at
Winston,
my hometown, Sandusky, Cedar Point.
hmm
We got the Millennium Force and the Top Thrill Dragster and the Magnum and the I don't know them all now Raptor. They're mostly in Sandusky, but you're right. The tallest and the fastest up and the fastest down, 500
that's
yards throwing, and then 4 interceptions.
4 interceptions, three of those for pick sixes, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's the Jameis Winston experience. That was the game of his life that explained everything there was to know about Jameis Winston. And it's funny because I know I've said this and I know I've written it in reference to Jameis Winston, and some of my guys have said it, and community members have said it. It's, I can live with some of Jameis's interceptions. Well, maybe you can until you actually start to see the interceptions. That's easier to say than it is to do. But
and
uh, but
when
anyway,
he's 30 for 30, and that was also his eyesight at that point in time,
oh my,
there are some concerns. Yeah, it's not
yeah,
how many interceptions as much as which interceptions they are for sure.
hmm yeah. It's very interesting. So anyway, Jared, I appreciate the time and what your team does and what my team does is so intertwined. In the next few and so interesting that maybe we're going to have to do this again at some point.
It seems like it. It seems like we might have to. If I wouldn't have, would you have? Kind of conversations will be
Yeah,
real interesting.
yeah. Maybe post draft we'll have to reconvene, and it's like just talk about why in the world did you do that? But but
Yes, sir.
anyway, appreciate the time, folks. Check out Dogs by Nature for Browns coverage that should be of interest to you guys for the next few weeks as we wait for what Andrew Barry's going to do for the Browns and Joe Shane's going to do for the Giants. So anyway, folks, remember to please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And as always, thank you for watching. Please stay safe out there, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.